I was asked about a year ago to come up with some cost to survey one of the largest ranches in Central California. It's about 10,000 acres. It's a really good hunting country, deer and pig country in the California coastal range here in Central California. And I talked a little bit about it in another video. And so we were asked to prepare a survey cost. And this is really rugged terrain. It was about, I think it was around 48 parcels that this rancher had assembled over the decades, and none of it had ever been surveyed since the since the late 1800s. So it was old, and there weren't a lot of monuments set. And we had some discussions with the buyer about how much it would cost for a survey. Of course, they weren't happy with the cost, and it was an expensive survey because it was a huge amount of land. It was several square miles of land. And one of the things so this is kind of an extreme example, right? It's not every day that I get asked to survey a 10,000 acre ranch, but sometimes extreme examples are valuable for the lessons they teach. And in this particular case, I think one of the lessons from that story, we ended up not doing the survey. They bought without a survey, but despite our recommendation that they not do that and the attorney's recommendation that they not do that. One of the lessons is part of the value in a large land holding like that is knowing what you own. And this farmer that had bought these 48 parcels over a period of 50 years, he didn't know what he owned. He had an idea of what he owned, but he didn't know exactly what he owned. He didn't even know almost exactly what he owned. He had a vague idea of what he owned. He had some deed descriptions and some tax assessor maps, but when you started to drill down and ask this buyer or the seller specific questions, is that road on your property? Is that stock pond on your property? Is that gate on your property? Is that creek on your property? Is that building, is that barn on your property? He couldn't answer those questions because he didn't know what he owned. So how do you properly estimate the value of a large landholding like that if you don't know what's on the property? If you don't know how much land there is? If you don't know the total number of acres, if you don't know what improvements are on the property, if you don't know if some of those parcels are landlocked. And, one of the conversations we had with the buyer is, given the age of the survey and just the area it was in, I said, you could be plus or minus 20% on your acres. You think you've got 10,000 acres because we've added up some tax assessor maps, but you could have 9,000 acres or 11,000 acres. We don't know. There could be a huge variation in the number of acres. Certainly there could be hundreds of acres difference there. I've seen that in that kind of land before. And so, how do you value that? It's tough. And so part of the value in a large rural landholding like that is the seller knowing what he owns. And most of the time that requires an accurate survey. And if you don't have an accurate survey, then the seller doesn't really know what he owns. And it's going to be hard to value that. And you need to get a survey before you buy it. So why are these large rural land holdings like this problematic? And I've seen many of them, and I've worked on a few of them. So why are they difficult? Well, they're difficult because most of the surveys are old. I'd say 80% of them haven't been surveyed in 100 years. Some of them have never been surveyed on the ground. The physical occupation like fences and walls may not exist. A lot of the rural areas here in Central California, there are no fences. It's just open range land. Or the fences follow physical features like ridges or creeks, and they don't correspond to the property lines. The land descriptions in the deeds are old. They contain errors. I remember one large land holding I looked at up against some Forest Service land in Nevada. It was over by Minden in the Carson Valley, and I found a 15-acre piece of no man's land that had just was forgotten between the private land and the Forest Service. 15 acres of prime forest land that people had just forgotten about because the deeds were hard to read. So that's why those large rural properties are problematic. And so what's the lesson of this? What do we learn? What's one of the things we learned from this 10,000 acre ranch in Central California? Part of the value of a large land holding is knowing what you own, how much land, where that land is on the ground, what improvements it includes, And the best way to get that information is to have an accurate survey. If there isn't an accurate survey, you need to get one before you buy. The purchase price should be discounted by the cost of that survey. I'll talk some more about that in another video.